So what is another life lesson you learned from this couple you worked under? You guys were they're youth pastors.
They really prioritized family and that balance, which was really a big lesson that we learned.
Welcome to Silently Bleeding, Hope for the Pastor's Wife. Today, our guest is Jennifer Spivey. Welcome, Jennifer.
I'm so excited to be here with you and to be with y'all as well.
Thank you. So we're just going to jump right in. Jennifer, you and Michael, your husband Michael, y'all started out in ministry as youth pastors. What was that experience like?
So just really briefly, I will sometimes tease Michael that I got the bait and switch. When I married Michael, he was a police officer.
Oh, wow.
And so 6 weeks after our wedding, we moved to Miami where he was a youth pastor. So we moved from North Georgia, rural town in North Georgia, 13 hours away from our families, to Miami, where it was a culture shock. I left my teaching position. And so I feel like the transition was immediate, but also we learned to depend. The good news, there's always good news, is that we learned to depend on each other and depend on the Lord in a way that I think we wouldn't have had we stayed at home.
Oh, that's
so
good.
I thought that ministry was somewhere on the horizon. So Michael didn't surprise me with that. I knew he had a call to ministry, and I sensed my own call to ministry. However, I thought this was going to be for little old people. And so, years from now, we'll sit on our front porch swing and look at the church in our backyard and little country church, So it was a surprise to move to Miami so soon, but it turned out to be good news.
Oh, that's great. In your first youth pastoral ministry position, the couple that were your lead pastors, sometimes that can be a great thing and sometimes it can be a difficult thing. What was that like for you guys?
It was a great thing for us. And the first pastors that we worked for, both of them were wonderful, wonderful people. They really took care of us. They really invested their wisdom into us. And I think that one thing that I take from that time, I think about when I look back at that time, is that they reined in our youthful enthusiasm in the best way. So when we got there, we're just so excited and we have a million ideas and we want to, we would bring something to pastor, and Michael's like, we need to have a Monday night small group and we need to do young adults on Tuesday. We need to do,
every day of the week
or something. And our pastor was always like, Michael, when are you going to see your family? And so he really taught us a balance between church life and home life. He really taught us how to balance that work life balance that we talk about a lot now, but in 1996 we weren't talking about those things in the same way, and so I think it was just a matter of lining up our priorities with the Lord's priority, and our pastor really helping us stay healthy so we would stay fit for ministry. He understood in a way that we did not understand at that time that without a healthy family life, without a healthy marriage, long-term ministry was not going to be sustainable.
Wow. I wish every lead pastor would invest that kind of investment into their youth pastors or other staff pastors, because, it's so easy to take advantage of somebody young and be like, oh, they want to go, burn the candle at both ends, let them do it while they're young. And,
Yes, exactly. But in doing that, a lot of times what we see is that patterns are developed, habits are developed, and then you get into these rhythms that are unhealthy long term. And where are you? And so this interview isn't about Sabbath rest and developing a rule of life, but let's put a bookmark there and maybe you'll let me come back sometime.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love that. So what is another life lesson you learned from this couple you worked under? You guys were they're youth pastors.
Sure. They really prioritized family and that balance, which was really a big lesson that we learned. They also prioritized setting a good example, and holy living was a really big deal in a way that, and again, a conversation that we're not having in the same way in 2024. But there were things on our church membership card that you didn't sign unless you agreed not to do these series of things, And so it may have been a step beyond what we would require of our staff today, but it just set some boundaries in place that I feel like have served us well over the years.
That's good. When we spoke on the phone, Jennifer, you mentioned something. What was that? A middle of the aisle decision or something. What was that?
Yeah. So our senior pastor, that was a great one. I should have said it first. Thanks for the reminder.
No worries.
Our pastor used to say that he was never going to make what he called a middle of the aisle decision. So if someone approached him right after service, imagine he's just finished his sermon, he's just finished altar, and he's walking down that center aisle ready to be out the door. If you come to him at that moment, he's not going to make a decision. And so he really just taught us, when you want to run, walk; when you want to walk, crawl; when you want to crawl, stop. Seek the Lord. And
could you say that again?
Yeah. When you want to run, walk; when you want to walk, crawl; and when you want to crawl, stop, and just seek the Lord and let him set your pace. But our pastor called that a down the middle of the aisle decision. And he purposed not to make those kind of decisions. And I see that in my husband even today.
Wow, that is so good, because it's so easy to, somebody catches you and you just give them an answer, and then it's like later you're like, oh, I should have thought that through. So
yes.
Wow, what
wisdom.
Most
of the time it's something good.
Yeah.
Right? They're not asking you to do anything evil. They're not asking you to do anything that compromises your morals or your integrity at all. It's usually good news, but we need to be really careful with our yeses. And so just because, the words Paul, I think, told us, all things are good, not all things are beneficial.
Yeah.
And so that moment to take a step back, Jan, let me get back to you on that. I'll call you in a couple of days. There's nothing wrong with that. And that slowing down to allow me a chance to hear from God is really a good thing. So we definitely learned that from the two of them.
Oh, that's good. I like to say, not every good thing is a God thing.
This is true.
In your first youth pastor position, what is something you learned from the lead pastor's wife?
She also had a great balance, as you can imagine, as I've described her husband, and her dedication to prayer and to the word was really, really an example. And I think that what I learned from her is that my time spent in study for a sermon, time spent in study for a Sunday school lesson or for a small group is not interchangeable with the personal time that I spend with the Lord. And so I can't say, well, I studied an hour a day. Every day this week, I studied the word and prayed in prep for Sunday school. That's not the same thing as taking care of my own soul and allowing the Holy Spirit to minister to me. And so I think that that was one way that I had gotten out of balance in those first years. And I think that the pastor's wife really demonstrated, probably more through example than words, that our own personal tending to our own personal spiritual life and tending to study of the word and prayer for the word for our own souls was as important, and not to be exchanged for preparing for ministry.
Oh, that is so good. Yeah, so important. All right, so after you left Miami, you went to what city was it?
So we were in Daytona.
Okay.
We went to Daytona next, and it was just a completely different experience and equally as fantastic.
That's
so we
great.
Really were, and when we were staff pastors, we really were fortunate to have excellent lead pastors over us.
After Michael's first youth pastor position, you guys transitioned to another youth pastor position.
Yes.
What are some of the things, some of the takeaways you got from this next lead pastor and his wife?
Sure. So the two pastors that we served under were from different generations, different stages in life. Both of them were equally as wise, equally anointed, equally fantastic. They were so good to us and such great leaders. Two completely different things, worlds apart. So I think that the pace was much faster at our second church, and having a younger pastor probably accounts for some of that, But also, I look back more than learning lessons in the moment. I look back at that season and can see from a different perspective some important lessons that I learned, because I was also in a different season. So when we moved to that second church, I had twins. Our twins were under 2, and I had a newborn.
Oh, wow.
And so where in Miami, the culture was really el pastor and la pastora. The church saw both of us as as the same position. Both of us were pastors. Now we were in an American church, and it was the pastor and his wife.
Right.
And so Michael was much more visible, and my role was more taking care of our home. I had my 3 little best friends with me, so that obviously slowed my pace down a lot. Michael did a lot of traveling with that pastor. It was a very busy time, but I was having to prioritize differently, and sometimes left to make those priorities on my own.
Oh, wow.
So all the lessons were good, but it was a completely different day.
So you had told me on the phone that when you guys went to that church, there was about 300 in attendance.
I would say 300 or 400. Yeah.
And then by the time you left, it was in the thousands.
Yeah.
Wow. That must have been some kind of transition to.
So I was just witnessing. So it wasn't because we were there. Didn't have, we don't take any kind of credit for that whatsoever, but really seeing that transition from a mid-sized church to multiplied thousands, and the priorities, adding staff, adding secretaries, adding ministries, just seeing the way our pastor scaled these things. You operate a church differently when it's 300 people. Here's the amount of staff you need. Here's the systems that you need to have in place. When you're 3,000 people, it's a whole different game. And so to watch him scale those things so we would be prepared for the future growth, he was anointed. The word says a secret of the Lord is with people who can be trusted, people who fear the Lord. And he was a man of prayer, and he was a great man of anointing. And I feel like the Lord prepared him in advance, so we could just see this growth happen and this scaling happen. It was really an exciting time.
Wow. And I think you had mentioned something about the focus on prayer really taught you a lot.
The focus on prayer really taught us a lot. This pastor was very, very dedicated to prayer, and rightly so. But if I can just be transparent, I didn't always love it. I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see my husband sometime. This is just me being selfish in the natural, right? It's not a spiritual stance. And back then, I don't know if they still do it now, but back then we had Saturday night prayer meeting every Saturday. Every Saturday night we were in the sanctuary praying. And now I think it's fantastic and I love it. And good things happened, obviously. Yeah. In my 20s, sometimes I thought to myself, I would have preferred to stay home.
Yeah.
Do I have to drag the kids out again? But sacrifices need to be made. And so anyway, so I just think that sometimes looking back, my perspective is different today than it was in the moment. Hopefully I didn't have a bad attitude. Hopefully I kept the smile on, but just being transparent, I had those moments. But there was definitely a dedication to prayer. And there was also a dedication to investment in the next generation. And so as Michael was traveling with this pastor, he's learning. And this was time spent together, and time spent in the car on the way to meetings, and time spent in the plane on the way, And so this was really an investment into him that we saw, fast forward a couple of years later when Michael was ready to leave that position, the investment continued.
That's amazing.
It really was.
You guys did life together. You just didn't pastor on staff together, but you did life together.
Yes.
And I think there's more caught than taught.
100%. 100%. Yeah, it was very valuable.
After you guys felt like your time was up at the second position, Michael, if I remember correctly, Michael felt called to start a church.
Yes. He did feel called to start a church. And since I've already been transparent, there's the veil's off now. Y'all already know I'm a regular person, so I might as well continue.
Yes.
I didn't love it at first. And so when he came home and he said, I really feel like the Lord's put it in my heart to plant a church in my hometown. Now I was on board with going back to his hometown because this is also where all my family is. So I was going to be excited about that move. I was not excited about a church plant because I think that when Michael said I'd like to plant a church, what I heard was I'd like to quit my job.
Oh.
And I think, you know, I don't want to put a damper on things, but I'm not working outside of our home, and I have 3 children. How are these two things going to go together if you're going to a place where there's nothing?
Yeah.
There's no building, there's no people. And we weren't talking about a move down the street. This wasn't a packed church that we were going to be in the same area and could take some people with us. This was a move hundreds of miles away in a different state. And so we really were going to nothing. And so anyway, so what I said was, wow, that sounds great. And I just made the rest a matter of prayer. And I didn't want to be discouraging, but
on the inside you were screaming.
But on the inside, I'm screaming silently. But yeah, it was difficult initially. And so I really just made that a matter of prayer. And Michael would leave a book on my nightstand about church planting, or, he would drop little things in conversation here and there. And I just realized this isn't going to go away. And I need to get busy about finding out what the Lord wants me to do in this situation. If he's calling Michael to this, he's calling me to this. What does that look like for our next season? So when I was really able to say, like Nathan said to David, go and do all that's in your heart, for the Lord's with you, and really truly be able to say, I'm going to be with you too. Yeah. Then we really saw some doors open, and really the Lord began to do some things that weren't the definition of a miracle, but felt miraculous at that time.
That's awesome. So when Michael went to his lead pastor and told him, I feel like God is calling us to leave and start a church in Georgia, how did your pastor respond?
So we were nervous about that, obviously. Senior pastors don't always take it well when their staff leaves.
Yeah.
But our pastor told Michael, he said, if this is what God's telling you to do, this is what God's telling our church to do. And he continued to pay Michael's salary for a full 6 months.
Wow.
After we left.
Wow. And that is a miracle.
That is a miracle. And then can I tell you just a little side story about this?
Sure.
After you could edit it out if you want to. After Michael talked to our pastor and received that news, then an uncle of his called, and he said, Michael, I want to see you. When are you coming up here? And Michael said, oh, I don't know when I'm coming up next, Uncle Charlie. I'll let you know when I come. We'll go out to breakfast together. And he said, Michael, I mean to give you $30,000. And Michael said, well, I'll be there tomorrow.
Wow, so, that's huge.
So he got up there, and Uncle Charlie said, I just want to tell you what's happened. He said, you get to be my age. He was an older gentleman and retired. And he said, when you get to be my age, you just want to do what you want. And what I want to do is watch preaching on TV. And he goes, for 3 straight days, the preachers didn't say anything except about me giving my money. And I don't want to give my money. I don't know what the Lord's trying to do. But one morning your mom showed up, and I said, what's that old Michael doing? And she said, well, Michael's a pastor and he lives in Florida. And Uncle Charlie said, and that's when I knew I'm supposed to give my money to you.
Wow.
And I think that we think that it was a percentage of a insurance policy that he had. And so so Michael went up and had breakfast with him that morning and took care of it then. So we not only had the salary to sustain us those first few months, we also had this amount of money to get us prepared to be portable and all that entails. And so really, really a blessing. I had taught in the area that we were moving back to. And so I called a former principal and told her what we were doing. And she said, well, why don't you use our school? And just gave us keys.
Wow.
We didn't pay rent. We didn't have to make any really arrangement with them. We were able to go in on Saturday, set up, leave it there, and then go in on Sunday. It's just an opportunity that a lot of church plants don't have.
Yeah.
And we were really blessed by that. So
wow. So God honored, even though you were screaming on the inside, no, I like to eat. My kids like to eat.
Yeah.
But you said, you know what, God, I'm not going to discourage my husband. I'm going to trust you with this.
Yes.
Look what he did.
And there it is. Every time, we don't want to say there's something, we don't want to say there's a formula in serving the Lord, right? But faith and obedience is almost almost a formula. If you're operating in faith and obedience, the Lord always honors that. And he always shows up when we think we're stepping out on nothing. And we really did feel like that.
Yeah.
God shows up just in time.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Wow. So before we wrap this up,
Sure.
tell me, Jennifer, the lessons you guys learned from these pastors, and I'm so grateful you guys had such amazing, godly, wise pastors to work with.
Such a blessing.
That is because we both, I'm sure, have heard stories of youth pastors or other staff pastors that worked under maybe a narcissistic lead pastor, and it did not end so well.
Sure.
So I'm grateful that was not your story. But tell me, how has that impacted you guys now? You've been at your church where you are now, back in Florida. For 16 years?
16 years.
How has your working under those pastors, how has that influenced you guys as lead pastors with the staff you have?
Sure. So I think because both of these pastors made such huge investments and deposits into Michael and I, we want to make those investments into our staff. And so Michael especially is just really good at that. And we've been able to maintain relationships with our staff even beyond them working for us, because we think we're not only interested in you and what you're going to do for our church, we're interested in you and what God wants you to do in your life. And so if that's here, we want to make an investment in you. If that's not here, we want to make an investment into what's next because we believe in you. And you know, one thing that when our pastor that told Michael, I'm going to continue to pay your salary, I think that one thing that was impactful, many things were impactful about that. But one thing that was impactful was that we saw this guy didn't view another church as competition.
Yeah.
He didn't view another minister as competition. And so there's no scarcity mentality. When he says, is this what you're going to do next? I want to do that too. And so we don't have to be afraid if we care for the needs of others that we'll go uncared for ourselves because God is our source, right? So if you're talented, it doesn't mean that I'm not talented. If you're loved, it doesn't mean that I'm not loved. And so when we can just live arms open, hearts open, wide open to not only our congregation, but to our staff as well, then it just creates just such a great relationship and such a great give and take that goes beyond our time serving together. Even right now, we have two former youth pastors from our church that Michael was the guy that hired them. When they left us, they stayed. So they're currently at our church right now. We've had in the past two former music ministers that left their position and stayed. They said, we feel like it's time to pass the torch. However, we love you. We don't know what we're doing next. Can we stay? Sure. And so it's funny to think of former staff hanging out and being with us, but it's such a blessing.
Wow.
You know, and then those relationships continue. And so it's really neat that as these men made these investments into us, we've learned that we can make investments into others without fear that God won't take care of us, you know?
That is so good. We were very blessed. Our first position, my husband was a youth pastor in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah.
And the pastors, when they resigned, they moved to Arizona. We were heartbroken because we became like family with them. You know, Jennifer, I mean, this is such a little thing, but they knew I loved strawberry ice cream back then.
Yeah.
And sometimes they would have us over for dinner and they would have Breyer strawberry ice cream.
The best.
And it was like, they did it for me.
Yes.
And they just loved us. They loved our girls. And we ended up working for another pastor. And then after that, we ended up going to be their youth pastors in Arizona.
Wow.
And so.
And you wouldn't have otherwise.
No.
Right.
No. Had they not been amazing
pastors,
they treated us like family and they cared for us.
Yes.
And and it was such a great honor to be their youth pastors in Arizona again. And we just love them so deeply.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, what advice do you have for young couples that they're struggling in ministry, keeping a balance with their family life, their ministry, and personal time with the Lord, all these things? What would you say to really encourage these couples? Because not all couples get to work for a pastor that says, hey, take time for your wife, take time for your kids.
Sure.
Take a Sabbath.
Sure. So sometimes you do have to develop these rules on your own.
Mm-hmm.
There were seasons that, there's necessarily seasons in ministry where it's busier than other seasons, right? And so you look at your calendar. If you have to set out your calendar both together and say, okay, look, our Sabbath, it looks like these next 3 months it's going to happen on Tuesday evening,
Mm-hmm.
or what, find those spots and turn the phone off.
Yeah.
I think that being in unity is huge. Psalm 133, I think it says that how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity, sisters too. And that in the last verse of that psalm, it says there, the Lord commands his blessing. And I think that the word there refers to the place of unity. And so really, if you could just get into unity with your husband, get into unity with what the Lord is doing in both of you, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not only about me following what Michael wants. This is about the vision that God's placed for my life, working inside the vision that God's placed for his life, right? We're put
Mm-hmm.
together for a reason. And so unity is huge, huge. So I would encourage young couples to pray for unity for sure. If they're working for a pastor who is not encouraging that work-life balance,
Mm-hmm.
then I think privately find those pockets on their calendar and say, okay, for this 3 hours, we're going to turn off the phone and find something to do or whatever. With your own children, your kids don't have to do everything.
Yeah.
So until your children can find their own balance, we need to guide them in that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to take a lot of stress off of family life. I think that also maybe one thing that I would say to young couples is that this is not going to be popular. I think the need is not always the call.
Mm.
And so every hole that there is, and there's going to be holes.
Yeah.
There's going to be times when certain things are not happening, where certain things are not fully staffed. That does not, it doesn't always follow that I'm the one that has to stick my finger in that dam.
Jennifer, where were you at when I was a youth pastor's wife?
I know. We've all been there, right? We've all done it. But if people could just remember, listen, you're called to do a specific thing that works within your specific gifts. And so let's do what only you can do as the Lord strengthens you, and allow the Lord to do what only he can do. Just really quickly in our church plant, maybe a little example to demonstrate this. In our church plant, Michael and I wrongly thought that our church would match our enthusiasm, and they did. But we thought, let's not ask them to do anything we're not doing ourselves. Let's work, and we have killed ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we really lost that balance for a season of time. And we noticed, you know what? The people aren't stepping up because I'm stepping up.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no one's doing children's church. Well, let me do children's church. Okay, nobody's working the nursery. I'll work the nursery. Oh, no one's leading a small group for the teenage girls. I'll do that. Okay, well, Michael, what are you going to do? So as we stepped up and did everything, we didn't leave space for other people to operate in their gifts.
Yeah.
And so that's when we thought the need is not the call. We should have allowed space for God to work in everybody in our congregation. And if you have to go without for a little bit, you have to go without for a little bit.
That is so good. And girl, I wish somebody would have taught me that when I was much younger.
Yeah.
I've learned to say no now.
Right.
And I've learned when someone comes to me with, oh, Jan, I think we should do this and that.
Middle of the aisle.
And yes. But one of the things that, I've learned to do is say, thank you so much for that suggestion. Maybe you should pray about leading that.
Yes, exactly. And now I don't get the wrong idea. These are principles that I'm trying. Some days I'm successful and some days I'm not successful. Yeah. But the Lord is helping me for sure.
Me too. There's times that I should say no that I've said yes still.
Me too.
But no is okay to say lovingly.
Absolutely.
Not with attitude. We have to be careful that we don't come across as, no, I'm not doing that.
Sure.
But to say the middle of the aisle decision, even if a lead pastor comes to you and says, hey, as the youth pastor's wife, would you be willing to da-da-da? Pastor, thank you so much for thinking of me. Can I pray about that? And then pray about it, talk with your husband, and then get back with an answer. And if the answer is no, I'm so honored that I keep hitting my...
It's okay.
I'm so honored that you would ask me, but I really don't feel that I can do that right now, but thank you for asking me.
Yeah.
And it's really okay to do that. And somebody needs to hear right now that's watching this that it's really okay to lovingly say, thank you for thinking of me, but no, thank you.
Absolutely. So it may be that we just came back to where we started with that healthy work-life balance.
That's
And
it.
we find that by spending time with the Lord and allowing Him to guide our steps.
Yeah, that's good. And you do have time to spend time with the Lord because
Yes.
we make time for what's important to us.
Yes,
All right.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Jennifer, thank you so much for
Thank
being with us
you.
today.
Thank
It's such a
you.
delight. Thank you, sweet woman of God, for being with us today. I trust this has encouraged you. If you have questions or comments, please leave them down below. I'll also leave my email address if you want to email us. We would love to be praying for you, and feel free to reach out in any way. Thanks again, my friend. God bless. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching Silently Bleeding, Finding Hope for the Pastor's Wife. I look forward to connecting with you. Feel free to leave me comments down below and make sure and subscribe. If you want to know every time a new video is coming out, hit the bell. I would be so delighted if you would also hit the like button, and feel free to share this video with anyone you know that this would encourage. Blessings, my friend.